Whose fault is masculinity? The conversations around masculinity in recent years have seemingly exploded in the public. There's been a noticeable rise in hypermasculine celebrities such as Andrew Tate, who've been successful in capturing the attention of young men, garnering a loyal following.
I get these messages all the time from guys. Hey, I got this girlfriend, I really like her, but she has these male friends. Make her choose. You are the friends. She's gonna fuck one of them eventually otherwise. Like, what are you delaying this for? If you are arguing about male friends.
These communities that have a focus on traditional views of masculinity propel misogynistic talking points and beliefs into their largely teenage members. Other notable men in the colloquially known manosphere have included Jordan Peterson,
saying men should be dangerous. By dangerous, that implies I should be ready to threaten someone, to hurt somebody.
No, you should be capable of it. But that doesn't mean you should use it. There's nothing to you otherwise. Like, if you're not a formidable force, there's no morality in your self-control.
Sneeko.
They're trying to make men weak and women stronger, and everything's getting confused, and now that's how they separate the family. That's how we don't raise any families properly. That's how we destroy people before they're born, when they believe in this bullshit. You name your kid after a car.
And Joe Rogan.
Hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. We are now around soft men in hard times. We're in the time of toxic masculinity, right? Where you could be toxically male. And then if you're suppressing masculinity, you're going to bring on hard times.
This conversation takes place in a politically charged climate where women are increasingly seeing their rights to bodily autonomy being taken away. In Australia, polling shows that support for gender equality has fallen by 15%. People thinking that gender equality has gone too far has doubled since 2022. Colloquially, we can see this divide manifested in the man or bear debate that plagued the internet mid-2024. The anger that women have felt against this backdrop is impossible not to feel in the zeitgeist. The Men Are Trash hashtag on Twitter in 2017, in the wake of the publicised murder of South African woman Karabo, was filled with stories of women's experiences of violence and abuse at the hands of men, with deliberately provocative language. Feminine rage stories have provided a cathartic release, an outlet of violence which is a rarely acceptable feeling for women. But the righteous anger doesn't stop, and will not stop here. 1 in 5 women in Australia have experienced sexual violence, most often by an intimate partner, and it's rising. Many of these statistics have to also be considered as conservative estimates, as much SA goes unreported. In this backdrop, it isn't a wonder that there is so much anger towards men. Every woman has a story with men. This is the framework that is most commonly used to view the situation. Women are the victims, men are the perpetrators, and in our society, perpetrators must be punished. This culminates in a dramatic tension between women and men, even amongst progressive circles. Regardless of whether or not you believe it is valid, men have openly spoken about the feeling of being demonized, and that's worth looking into. The isolation men have felt has been a main talking point of the manosphere, known as the male loneliness epidemic.
I just watched a 10-hour video essay about how the male loneliness epidemic is a result of woke Hollywood movies.
It's not really about that.
Explain.
Years of austerity politics, not to mention massive wealth inequality, means everyone lives in a hustle culture. No one's financially stable. Everyone feels alone.
Okay.
I mean, massive male wealth inequality.
There it is.
These men will point to women, particularly feminism, or just a vague semblance of wokeness, as the reason for the male loneliness epidemic. This video essay was spurred on by a conversation I had with a friend over the male loneliness epidemic, and in particular, a comment she made that I found incredibly interesting. I feel like there is no male loneliness epidemic. There is just an epidemic of men realizing that there's a consequence for their own actions. I think women are taking a massive step back from the mothering and caring role. This comes from someone who, like all women, has suffered under the actions of men. Her thoughts are completely understandable from a point of anger, frustration, and tiredness. It's as if to say, why the fuck are we, the people that have always been the mothers, the partners, and the ones with the patience and understanding, but are always the ones that are hurt the most, supposed to continue to feel sorry? We're told to infantilize these men, but no, they are responsible for their own actions and should be held accountable. And I think that's fair. And men that are secure in themselves may be able to see that anger and frustration and not internalize it and see the problematic behaviors that they themselves exhibit, there is a chance that they will reflect and change. But most men don't hear that. All they hear is that their feelings don't matter. Something that, if you've grown up as a boy, is a sentiment you've heard time and time again in your life. As I have only recently started identifying as non-binary, this is something I really relate to and understand the frustration of. Perhaps this framework of this being a man versus woman situation is restrictive and doesn't convey the complexity that the situation deserves. For this, I want to point to a book by Bell Hooks called The Will to Change. Written in 2004, this book pretty much predicts the male loneliness epidemic. But instead of as a phenomenon to happen, it considers itself as an inevitable outcome of patriarchy itself. Patriarchy. Patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. Patriarchy is so visible when you point it out. It is something children are often frustrated by, whether it is the fact that they must follow its rules, or that others aren't following the rules that they themselves are expected to. I work in childcare, so when I've asked kids, is soccer a boys' sport or a girls' sport? Unsurprisingly, most conclude it's a boys' sport. A few clever souls point out, well, the Matildas are girls, and I've watched them play soccer, and my friend so-and-so plays soccer, so it can be a girls' sport. But when it's pointed out that they are in the minority, they too usually come to the conclusion that it must be a boys' sport more, often to their frustration, and they say that it's a rougher sport, where you're more likely to get hurt, and that's what makes it more a boys' sport. The message is clear to them. Boys are supposed to be rougher, girls are supposed to be softer. Why are boys rougher? A national survey of adolescent males revealed their passive acceptance of patriarchal masculinity. Researchers found that boys agreed that to be truly manly, they must command respect, be tough, not talk about problems, and dominate females. This isn't a natural phenomenon. When boys do express feelings, show vulnerability, a weakness, or form healthy relationships with females, they're socially shunned. Maybe it's by a parent, a teacher, or an adult. But most often it's their male peers. Sometimes they're female peers.
Joshy is cool. Really, Joshy's not cool. He's a lip-syncing pop star whose fans are 8-year-old girls. You're just jealous that I was the one who discovered him. Who are you gonna listen to, Rowley? Me or Joshy? Joshy says to respect your parents and follow your dreams. And Joshy must get beaten up a lot.
If these traits have to be disciplined out, it cannot be natural. These myths of patriarchy permeate the media we consume. Stories of masculine heroism, such as Batman and James Bond, glorify emotional detachment and aggression as desirable traits. Emotional vulnerability is a weakness. You must dominate to win, and you usually do it through your own grit and determination. These myths tell the story of masculinity, a story our boys internalize, becoming a part of their identity. And this identity is inherently isolating. The way we turn boys into men is through injury. We sever them from their mothers, research tells us, far too early. We pull them away from their expressiveness, from their feelings, from sensitivity to others. The very phrase, be a man, means suck it up and keep going. Disconnection is not fallout from traditional masculinity. Disconnection is masculinity. Men are not encouraged to display many emotions outside of rage. Under the restrictive, hypocritical, and contradictory structure of patriarchy, there is a lot to be rageful about. Men under patriarchal capitalism are seen as the providers, and their manhood is stripped if they are unable to provide. They are constantly emasculated at work, submitting to their superior boss. Men exist in a constant state of hyper-competition. They are to dominate over other men and women. Forming meaningful relationships means being vulnerable, a sign of weakness and sin under patriarchy. Talking about your feelings is discouraged due to its association with femininity. As a result, they never develop the vocabulary to understand what's happening internally, disconnecting themselves from themselves. Shame is a byproduct of not living up to these ideals. But since shame is not one of those approved feelings, how do you reckon that manifests? Rage masks the vulnerability of shame. The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. Masculinity is loneliness by design. The only reason it's so visible now is that in the past, men overwhelmingly had a role where in some small way, the myths they were told could be manifested. As a male in the household, they could tap into their masculinity through domination or committing violence, physical, emotional, or sexual, as an outlet from their demasculation at work. As women have increasingly gained financial independence, this has become less the case. When their outlets of masculinity are stripped, all that's left is a hollow shell of empty promises and a choice. Recognize that the myths they were told and were encouraged to shape their identities around, often by the men and women in their lives, were wrong? This choice leads inevitably to an identity crisis. Or they can double down into the role, become the patriarch by any means necessary. I know who I am, it's everyone else that's the problem. The Matrix is out to get me.
Men know inherently that the happiest moments of your life are your most masculine moments, right? Like when you score a goal and then you do that big, see the Ronaldo celebration, or when you're watching UFC and the guy knocks you out, like that punch is what you frame, that knockout punch to win you the world title, right? When you have up here the plaque for having 1 million sales with ClickFunnels, like that moment is just like, look what I've accomplished, look what I did better than all the people that didn't.
Often both occur. Patriarchal culture continues to control the hearts of men because it socializes males to believe that without their roles as patriarchs, they will have no reason for being. What to do? If the nature of masculinity as we all know it is itself the problem, what should we do? Bell Hooks argues that for those men that have been traumatized by the current model of masculinity, learning to be in touch with one's emotions is at the forefront of transformation. Strategies that modern men's health retreats and wellness programs encourage, such as journaling, being emotionally vulnerable in front of other men, and other mindfulness-based practices can lead to a greater awareness. This is a great first step, but don't be fooled into thinking this is the answer itself. For the next generation, reimagining and constructing a new masculinity should be the priority. Feminist masculinity presupposes that it is enough for males to be, to have value, that they do not have to do, to perform, to be affirmed and loved. Rather than defining strength as power over, feminist masculinity defines strength as one's capacity to be responsible for self and others. This strength is a trait males and females need to possess. As parents, educators, and adults in young boys' lives, we can allow them to express a full range of emotions. Don't limit their approved feelings. Their feelings are valid and can point to other needs not being met. Support their sensitivity, instead of trying to toughen them up. Sensitivity can be awareness of the self, but also awareness of others. Encourage emotional literacy. Help them name and navigate their feelings. Model vulnerability and love, especially for boys raised by men. But this requires us to be proactive and attentive at all times in our child's lives, an impossible task, especially with how capitalism further drives us apart from being in our children's lives. Little boys are the only males in our culture who are allowed to be wholly in touch with their feelings, allowed moments when they can express without shame the desire to love and be loved. If they are very, very lucky, they are able to remain connected to their inner selves, or some part of their inner selves, before they enter a patriarchal school system where rigid sex roles will be enforced by peers as rigorously as they are in any adult male prison. Those rare boys who happen to live in anti-patriarchal homes learn early to lead a double life. At home they can feel and express and be. Outside the home, they must conform to the role of patriarchal boy. Patriarchal boys, like their adult counterparts, know the rules. They know they must not express feelings, with the exception of anger, that they must not do anything considered feminine or womanly. We must teach our children to recognize patriarchal masculinity when it rears its ugly head.
Netflix has made its hit series Adolescence free to watch for secondary schools in an effort to help pupils understand the impact of misogyny and the dangers of being radicalised online.
The show Adolescence has sparked mass debate, particularly in the UK where it's set. The conversations around it suggest that it has been important in helping parents and adults understand the complexities and tribulations of growing up in the modern age. Teenagers have been able to see patterns in their own or others' behaviour that are displayed in the show that aren't a far-fetched reality. I saw particular trains of thought that I myself, as a teenager conditioned under patriarchy, had been led to believe. Hell, I used to watch Onision. How I got out of that without too many problematic views is beyond me.
Is there even a point to makeup if you're not light-skinned? You look horrified. Like, did someone just hit you? I can't rate that.
Empathy for the perpetrator of such a heinous act is discouraged and at the heart of our alienating justice system. With the risk of male violence still being such a prevalent topic, particularly with the conversations around the manosphere, culturally understanding the conditions and mentality that could lead to such events is vital in combating it. But if the online response to the show is anything to go off, watching a base TV show is just not enough. The hyper-focusing of the manosphere, or the computer Jamie played on, or the fact he was bullied as the primary reason for Jamie killing Katie, misunderstands the situation. These are all factors, yes, but they are also symptoms of a greater problem, not the absolute problem itself. This show has been made free for viewing in schools across Britain, and I hope that it may be of help. A critical lens is required to analyse this show. People can already see themselves and their peers in this show. They may just need the language to articulate it, and I think Bell Hooks' framework may be one of the most empathetic approaches. Feminism was the worst thing to happen to us, is something my grandfather told me a while ago. I see this sentiment, maybe not so extreme in men around me, a desire to blame the other side. And what do we hear on this other side? Men are the problem. I keep going back to these comments, these sentiments, emblematic of how we are so conditioned to place the blame on our neighbour, on 50% of the human population. It's the same thing every time. On climate change, it was us with our plastic straws and fuel consumption. On housing, it's the immigration policy, or the kids eating avocado toast, or dole bludgers. Meanwhile, 57 companies are responsible for 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, 1 million homes in Australia are vacant properties. Our system is tied to housing as an investment, a commodity, rather than a right. And yes, 87% of the world's billionaires are men. But 99% of men also have less wealth than the 1%. This is the paradox of patriarchy. Your manhood, your value is tied to winning at all costs. Yet the game is designed so that only a few do, at the cost of the rest. The rest are down here with us, blaming each other for our suffering. All whilst the real enemies laugh at us in their ivory towers, supported by the structures that kept them there, and us, down here. White supremacist capitalist patriarchy. This Frankenstein of scary leftist words is the term Bell Hooks uses to describe the way these different systems uphold and interconnect with one another, forming the bastardized society we live in today. A superstructure. We are seeing significant evidence of the weakening of some of these individual structures, but these foundations hold one another up. If one leg falls without the dismantling of the others, the superstructure still exists. But if all the legs are weakened though, well, all but a strong push would be required to collapse it. Patriarchy has no gender. It is not a being. It is not absolute. It is not inevitable. Patriarchy hurts women and men, and it definitely hurts all those outside and in between. To dismantle this system requires more than just individual accountability. It demands collective reimagining. It demands us think outside of common sense, one that was manufactured for us long ago. This will look differently to all of us. For men, this can look like forging spaces to unlearn patriarchal scripts and relearn emotional vocabulary. For women, this can be looking inward into how patriarchal norms are perpetuated by all genders. Anger is valid, but we must move beyond blame. For children, we can teach them emotional intelligence, encouraging vulnerability in boys and boundary setting in girls. And for my queer baddies, your existence in itself is a challenge to this false binary and does so much to dismantle this system already. But we are not exempt from our patriarchal conditioning either. We must challenge our scripts every day, like everyone else. We're in this together, not apart. Dismantling patriarchy isn't about punishing men. It's about freeing us all. And this starts with a radical empathy. A choice to see men not as the monsters they may seem to be, but as fellow victims of the poison we have all drunk from. And as Bell Hooks says, The practice of love is the most powerful antidote to the politics of domination. And you, who judges, who would be just, what judgment pronounce you upon him, who though honest in the flesh, yet is a thief in spirit? What penalty lay you upon him, who slays in the flesh, yet is himself slain in the spirit? And you, who would understand justice, how shall you, unless you look upon all deeds in the fullness of the light? Only then shall you know that the erect and the fallen are but one man standing in twilight between the night of his pygmy self and the day of his god self, and that the cornerstone of the temple is not higher than the lowest stone in its foundation.